もしやコスモでは。
Cosmo makes me feel.
Cosmo AP Luxury Sports.
Remember episode 19 where I pulled off these completely rotted inner fender panels? Well, it took 2 years, but I have finally sourced a replacement set. Now, coming off of a 37-year-old car, they're not quite perfect, but compared to what I would have had to repair on my original panels, the minimal repairs that I'll have to make to these are going to save me a ton of time. Here's the passenger side, fresh out of the blast cabinet. And while it has a few holes here and there, they're going to be fairly straightforward repairs. Of course, those repairs mean that, at least just for a little while, I'm back on this sheet metal. Yay! Like all sheet metal repairs, this one starts by first identifying the old. And just cut it out. Close enough. I need this curve. Wow, perfect fit, first try. Okay, tacked in place. Time to weld that sucker in. Now there are a few spots like here and here that have formed little holes because of the pitting, and it's not quite worth just cutting the whole area out and replacing, so I'm just going to weld up the holes. Grind those down and they'll be as good as new. Now this area is completely trashed, and because it's so thin on the back, it has to just be cut out and replaced. There's no welding those up. With the crap cut out, of course, the next step is to make the patch panel. And I have to put this curve in it, so I have found this piece of tubing which has about the same radius. So I should be able to just chuck it in the vise. And then carefully bend the new metal over it. I've already drawn a line in the center of the bend. This should give me somewhat of a decent curve. Not too bad. Now it won't match perfectly because it's a compound curve, but it'll be damn close enough. Wow. Actually, I really can't complain about that. I love it when things just work out. I had to cut it out with the Dremel because the bandsaw does not do very well with irregular 3D shapes. However, looks like I'm close enough. It's been so long since I've done sheet metal, I forgot that like 20 minutes of welding creates 3 hours of grinding. I would imagine that the reason these things rust out is because all of the water that comes down the windshield and ends up in the cowl drains through a hole into these inner fender pieces. Now there's a big drain hole here, but there's a low spot here without a drain hole, which is just ripe for rust. So I'm just going to mark a hole right here, which I'll drill, and that'll give me a drain for this area, just in case. Well, now that the panel is all repaired, I'll do a test fit on the car, just because, you know, this did come off another Cosmo, and of course it got damaged during removal, a little bit warped during all the welding, etc., etc. So we'll test fit this, just to make sure things are close enough, and then, assuming it lines up reasonably well, I will begin the process of preparing it to be POR-15, then finally weld it back onto the car. And the thing is, even from the factory, spot weld flanges didn't necessarily line up perfectly. That's why those spot welding robots at the factory put several tons of force onto these panels when they make the weld. It's not bad though. Not bad at all. Not bad. I gave the interior of the panel just a really quick re-blasting, just to get off any of the crud and surface rust that I may have put on while I was fixing it up. A little bit of brake cleaner to remove the blasting residue, and then it's ready to begin the prepping process for POR-15. I also need to remove as much of the surface rust as I can from the car. POR-15 can be painted over rust. In fact, that's what POR stands for, paint over rust. But in my experience, you still get the best result when you bring the rust down as much as possible. And since this area was blasted, it's basically rust-free aside from some powdery surface rust. It's really not worth hauling out the blasting equipment just to do this small area, so a wire brush on the die grinder does the job. Now you've seen me use POR-15 before, but for those kind of just joining me, the first step in this multi-step process is to apply Metal Ready, which is a phosphoric acid etch. And what it does is it neutralizes rust that's already on the surface and etches it to receive the POR-15. On a clean surface like this, it has to remain wet with the stuff for 10 to 20 minutes. I usually give it a little bit longer. You can see how it's starting to bubble up. That would be it dissolving the rust. It does, however, make a wicked huge mess. Now you can't let the Metal Ready dry, so it's kind of a process of using a little brush to continuously re-wet the surface and apply more Metal Ready when necessary. Now you can tell after about 15 minutes or so of sitting, almost all the surface rust is completely gone. It's been 20 minutes, so now the Metal Ready gets thoroughly rinsed off with water. And I just realized that I cannot fit the rest of this thing in the sink. Sink's too small and I don't have a hose, so I'll just rinse it off on the bench. Of course, rinsing it off with water means the whole area is now soaking wet, as is quite likely the surrounding area in your shop. POR-15 needs to be applied absolutely bone dry. So the next step will be to completely and totally dry this with the air compressor. Absolutely 100% bone freaking dry. Otherwise, anywhere there is moisture, I guarantee if you cover that up with POR-15, you're going to rust out that area because the moisture will be trapped under the paint. Now ideally you'd let that sit completely overnight just to make sure it's absolutely dry, but I want to get the first coat on today. Because POR-15 has a very limited shelf life once the can is open, I prefer to buy it in these little cans. And that way, I'm all set for small jobs that don't require a ton of paint. That right there may be enough to do both the inner fender piece and the car. We'll see. Either way, the can is empty. Wear gloves. Trust me on this. Even though POR-15 is not at all a weld-proof paint, I'm going to paint all around these spot weld holes, and then I'll just grind it off later because it's a crap ton easier doing that than it is to mask every single one of these holes. The first coat shouldn't go down too thick, otherwise you're going to cause runs and it'll take absolutely forever to dry. For a small job like this, it's also not worth setting up all the spray equipment. Might as well just brush it on. Now you don't have to be ultra neat with this stuff. It lays down pretty well and will flatten out. And of course this area is going to be completely covered. But go back and smooth out any drips and or runs with your brush, because in my experience those drips and runs take absolutely forever to dry, and if they are thick enough they may dry slightly porous, which you can tell that has happened by the appearance of small bubbles on the surface. And if that happens, well, the protection of POR-15 is ruined because it now has a bunch of pores, so you'll have to either sand it or recoat it in some other way, which kind of defeats the whole purpose. Okay, well, that's not a bad first coat. Now, drying time depends immensely on temperature and humidity, anywhere from 3 to 6 hours, but I usually just let it dry overnight. 3 coats of POR-15 have been applied and are now fully cured, so I'm just going to pop this back onto the car. Now, using the Dremel, I'm going to mark every single one of these spot weld holes because I have to go in and remove the POR-15 from the area to be welded and instead paint it with weld primer. I've been masking the car and the panel now in preparation for weld primer for damn near 40 minutes, maybe even an hour. And I gotta tell you, it sucks. It sucks more than a Miley Cyrus dance routine. Seriously, what the f*** was that? Anyway, I'm almost done. Then I can lay down the weld primer. Then I can weld in the panel. So even though I POR-15 the whole area, I figure I might as well weld through primer it too, because hell, can't have too much rust protection. Okay, first coat, 2 more. Now this is the last time I'll be able to access this area, because obviously once the panel is in place I can no longer get at these seams, and since these seams go directly inside the car, they're gonna need a good helping of the old seam sealer. Oh, I am bad at this. I have every single set of vice grips and clamps holding this thing in place. So now it's time to make about 1,000,001 spot welds to burn it in permanently. I forgot how much it sucks welding through weld primer. Ugh, terrible. Holy crap. After a very infuriating 2.5 hours, that was the last spot weld. Now I'm just grinding down the 1.5 spot welds that I made, and it's just a quick grinding. It's not to make them look perfect, because this whole area is going to be POR-15, undercoated, underneath a fender, etc., etc. But I do at least want them to look reasonably okay, so that at first glance you can't tell that it was repaired. Oh! Now I remember why I hate sheet metal work more than I would hate, say, a colonoscopy performed by a bicurious porcupine. Done. The passenger side reattachment is done. And I mean done like you know what, I don't know. I just don't have enough enthusiasm about sheet metal work right now to give you a hilarious comparison. With the passenger side done, obviously the next step is the driver's side. However, since the procedure is almost exactly the same, you probably don't need to see it in such great detail, so we'll just blast through it, show you the highlights, and I think that'll be much appreciated by everybody, because sheet metal work is boring and awful, and you're just watching it. I'm actually doing it. It's kind of been a bit of a pain to blast these things because they're bigger than the blast cabinet. So I've had to extend it temporarily with a little bit of plastic, which sort of works. Now, like the passenger side, I just welded up the pinholes and a little damage caused by the saw during removal. A very happy coincidence is that an area on the new panel that is rotted out was perfectly fine on the old panel. So a little bit of Dremel work, and I can simply transfer the good section to the damaged section. And that was the last weld. So, not counting the 2 hours of grinding, I'm going to call this finished, which means the driver's side and passenger side inner fender panels are done and done. And that was some radically unpleasant sheet metal work. I had almost forgotten how much I dislike working with sheet metal. Regardless though, I consider this to be a major milestone in the project, and it represents probably the second last major sheet metal repair that I have to perform. The last major sheet metal repair will be the frame rail on the passenger side. So, what's up for next episode? Well, I think these two big boxes from Vintage Air might be a bit of a clue.